Good morning, good evening to all our viewers across the world. Today I have a special guest, Stephen Mehler. Some of you may know him. He's actually been a very popular figure among Egyptologists studying the pyramids. He's worked with many fascinating researchers across the world over many decades. And today we're going to have just a very, very interesting impromptu interview with Stephen. And so let's just jump right into it. How are you, Stephen?
I'm doing fine, and the last name is pronounced Mailer.
Mailer, not
Yes,
Myler. Mailer.
no,
Okay,
Mailer.
Mailer. My apologies.
No problem.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you. So you've done a tremendous amount of research in crystal skulls, Egyptology, pyramids in general, alchemy, a lot of this type of research. One of the first questions I wanted to ask you is, talk to me about your experiences and knowledge of crystal skulls.
Well, it goes back to 1979. I was a staff research scientist for the Rosicrucian Order, AMARC, in San Jose, California.
Okay.
At that position, I was known as an archaeologist, or I did had a background in archaeology and Egyptology. I actually became the resident Egyptologist for the order at the time. So we were contacted by a man who was living in San Jose, California, and he had been working with some Mexican business people, and he wanted to know if we'd be interested in the Rosicrucian Museum, Rosicrucian Order, in dealing with some artifacts that he had. He sent us some photographs, and the photographs were of a crystal skull. That crystal skull later became known as the Mayan crystal skull, was named such by the preeminent researcher of crystal skulls, Mr. F.R. Nick Nocerino,
Okay.
who left this plane in 2004. I contacted him, I worked with him, and we got to work together. So, to make a long story short, we said yes, we were interested. We arranged for the skull to be brought in January 1980, and we had sessions with it in the Rosicrucian laboratory, working with people. And that was my first experience. And since then, I've seen many, many different crystal skulls, all the famous ones. I co-authored a book about crystal skulls with David Hatchett Childress
Okay.
called Crystal Skulls: Portals to Man's Ancient Past. And so I've been involved in that research now for over 20 years.
Amazing. So with the crystal skulls, what exactly makes the properties or the crystal skulls as such, what makes them so profound and so unique?
It's quartz itself.
It's the
It's the
quartz.
properties. It's quartz itself. Again, I also had the great opportunity to work with another amazing scientist, Dr. Marcel J. Vogel,
Okay.
who also was an eminent researcher of crystal skulls and had done his doctoral work on liquid crystals.
Hmm.
He actually had a theory how quartz crystal stores information. What we know is these ancient crystal skulls were the computers of their day. Before there was written language, these skulls were used to actually record information, record events, record people's vibrations, and so that they are history. So we can actually access that information in the skulls. Nick Nocerino and Marcel Vogel both taught methods of meditating with the skulls and being able to communicate. So again, to make a long story short, because it is a long story, we've actually been able to see historical events. We know that these skulls were in many different cultures in Egypt, with the Maya, the Olmec, the Aztec, in Tibet, uh, uh, all over the place. So they were the ancient computers. So they stored information. And actually, again, Marcel Vogel gave us a scientific theory how quartz can actually store energy.
Now, how does one exactly access the information from the crystal skulls? Is how do they do that?
You have to be able to go into meditation with the skull.
Okay.
To go into deep, there's breathing techniques can be done, just quieting the mind and allowing images. And again, it's called in the field of parapsychology psychometry. You're
Okay.
working with an item that is an unknown. You
Okay.
try to concentrate on that item and see scenes, impressions,
Mm.
ideas that may relate to that item. So we worked with so-called professionals. We didn't call them psychics when I worked in the
Correct.
Rosicrucian Order. We actually hated that term. We used the word sensitive
Nice.
because everybody is sensitive to some degree.
Correct. Correct.
So we had people who were professional sensitives, and they came in. We had psychometry sessions with many different skulls. I had with the Mayan crystal skull, another one called the amethyst crystal skull. I've worked with others, and so I would actually record these events. We actually did video recording and audio recording of people's impressions, and then we tabulated it later and see how many people had made hits together, saw the same things, and we had scenes that would be couldn't. Oh, we saw jungle scenes. People would see scenes of the ancient Maya, ancient Egypt, and Knights
Mm.
Templars, seems like that. And so we recorded all of that, and I wrote reports for it because we're Persian order.
And these, when you say you can induce a type of trance with the crystal skulls by doing breathing exercises, Are these breathing exercises similar to the ones that the yogis call pranayama?
Sure.
Okay, it is
It-
similar.
it- Absolutely.
Okay,
It's to create a relaxed state so that the mind, we never can actually stop the thoughts in our mind when we
right.
meditate, but we have the spaces between thoughts where you can quiet the mind and quiet yourself as much as possible and then allow impressions to come in.
So those,
Some people get energy, they feel energy. Some people actually see physical scenes in
okay,
Technicolor. Some people just get ideas, thoughts, different ways that it comes in. But the skulls do, they are attuned to work with human minds. There's no doubt they were created that way. They were created by great ancient shamans. We don't think aliens, extraterrestrials, some people do, but we think great ancient shamans created these, carved these in quartz by hand, and put their intent into the crystal.
okay.
So it contains that consciousness in there.
Amazing. So some people, when they do their meditations or their breathing exercises, I'm assuming holding the crystal skulls, right? They're
Yes,
holding the crystal skulls, then they actually have visions in what would be considered the third eye region. Is that right?
yes, yeah, or in the mind, yes. And there are different ways actually to hold the skull where you make a triangle over the third eye of the skull. That,
Okay.
that amplifies it too. Yeah, you see impressions, you see images, you see ideas in your mind, and we can record that.
Now, during any of these meditative or breathing sessions, does the practitioner ever take ayahuasca or any of these type of psychotropic drugs, or is
We
that
have we haven't,
okay?
but we know the Maya did.
Okay.
There's no doubt. In fact, I am utterly convinced that the only way you can understand Mayan codexes is to be on mushrooms or some kind of psychedelic, because they were when they did it.
Right.
So I can tell you personally, and I'm not afraid to say that I did
Okay.
with crystal skulls. I did take psychedelics, and it was an amazing, amazing experience.
And what do you mind sharing some of those experiences, some of the
Oh,
more
it
profound
just
experiences?
I mean, you just totally disappear. You're not there anymore. The
Mm,
skull, you actually can go into the skull, and you go into the scenes that you see. You can actually, I mean, again, before I wrote my first book in Egyptology, first book in Egypt, 2001, called The Land of Osiris, and before I even met my Egyptian teacher, who we're going to talk about, I saw scenes in this amethyst crystal skull. We had 1983. I saw scenes of ancient Kemet. I saw the pyramids before when it was lush and green, and I knew the pyramids were not tombs. I saw scenes very ancient. I did not get corroboration on these scenes that I saw until I met my Egyptian teacher 9 years later.
mm.
So I saw scenes of ancient Egypt in the
And
crystal.
before we move on to the next subject, I wanted to just tangent off of on that. How ancient or exactly how ancient are those pyramids in Egypt, the three major pyramids today that we call Cheops? When were they constructed about?
Well, for just to start, we know that there are 72 known pyramids in Egypt, and
Okay.
there were many more. The Giza Plateau seems to be unique because they're the largest pyramids. However, again, my first book, The Land of Osiris, based on the teachings of my indigenous wisdom keeper, Abdel Hakim Aouyan, who was known as Hakeem. He was a senior tour guide in Egypt for 56 years. He was credentialed Egyptologist and archaeologist and an indigenous wisdom keeper, a keeper of the oral tradition. According to the oral tradition he presented to us, there's a series of sites from Dashur in the south to Abu Wash in the north that all had stone masonry pyramids, all connected in a grid line. So Giza and Saqqara, which are the famous sites where most people think the famous pyramids are, were just part of a complex. That complex, he said, was the oldest of the old as far as the civilization goes. So I will say to you that they were at least over 12,000 years. I say the Great Pyramid was aligned 26,000 years ago. So 20,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, these were fully functioning and, as we call them, machines, not tombs. Not tombs. So
Amazing.
over 20,000 years, I will tell you the Giza Plateau is. In fact, we date the Sphinx on the Giza Plateau as being 54,000 years old. And if the civilization began 65,000 years ago, this cycle. So the Giza Plateau, in my opinion, is the oldest archaeological site yet found in the world, even though others have claimed other sites, like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, like other sites being older, but they're using the contemporary date that Egyptology uses of the pyramids being 4,500 years old. I'm saying they're over 20,000 years old. The Giza Plateau itself as an occupation site is over 50,000 years. There's no other known occupation site older in the world.
Do the crystal skulls at all integrate with these pyramids to any extent? Do they cross?
Well, again, the idea is crystal. You
Right.
see, one of the
It's not the
major
skulls,
things.
it's the crystal, actually.
Exactly. It's the
Right.
quartz. It's the quartz.
Mm.
And quartz was a major factor in ancient Egypt and all the ancient megalithic civilizations. They purposely chose the stones for their vibratory ability. So they chose what we call igneous rock, volcanic stones, granitic stones, full of quartz crystal. So yes, quartz is important for transmission of energy. And quartz, as we know, you squeeze quartz, piezoelectric, it can create an electric charge.
Right.
What quartz does, we wouldn't have our computers that we're talking now, we wouldn't have our timepieces, anything if it wasn't for quartz. Quartz takes incoherent electrical charges and makes it coherent. So
Right.
quartz is very important for transmission of energy. So yes, the crystal skulls are connected to the pyramids in that understanding of ancient peoples knew the qualities of quartz and knew the qualities of stone. Again, we always say, as far as it goes for ancient Egypt and all megalithic sites around the world, they chose the stone particularly for its ability to transmit and its vibratory abilities. Not any way worrying about the hardness or the difficulty in working with the material. And this is why Egyptology and academia falls way short. They cannot explain how the people that they find with the toolkits they have found of copper chisels,
Right.
copper drills, could actually do this in granite. And now, even Joe, this year, we have made an even more amazing discovery. We now know that they worked in materials harder than granite. We
Right.
believe that, first of all, we believe they have diamond tools. But now we have found a bowl in the Cairo Museum, not properly labeled, that may have corundum in it. Corundum, in its purest sense, is ruby, and sapphire is 9 on the Mohs scale, 10 being diamond, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Mohs, M-O-H-S, is a scale that geology and mineralogy use to rate the hardness of stone. Diamond being 10. Ruby, 9. Corundum, if it's in granite deposits, can be 8 or 8.5. So all this time, we've been talking about their ability to work with 7 hard stone, which is granite. The hardest granites are 7 on the Mohs scale, depending on the amount of quartz. And it is the quartz that makes it 7, not the feldspar,
Right.
not the substrate. So quartz is the key ingredient. Now we find corundum, which has aluminum silicates in it, which these bowls may be 8, 8.5. How did they carve these things?
Mm.
This is the mystery. Had to be with some advanced, sophisticated machining using diamond tool marks, and we believe sound.
Sound.
Sound is the key.
Correct. I agree with you. I think sound had a lot to do with it. I think sound vibrations and, what they're calling today quantum levitation, I think that might have had a lot to do
Well,
with the construction of those
again,
pyramids.
our great teacher, who are Hope Field, again, I'm talking about the Kemet School of Ancient Mysticism. The website is www.kemetology, spelled KHEMITOLOGY.com. It's
We'll put
based
the
on
link. We'll put the link below on this video too, so
great,
people can access it.
great. Based on the teachings of my teacher, Abdel Hakeem Alian, I work with his second youngest son, who's the co-director with his wife, Patricia, of the school, and you'd be great to interview them. And you could actually Skype them in Egypt and interview them. We could arrange
Perfect.
that.
Let's do it.
Okay, great. So he always said, Hakeem always said to me, the only way to deal with all that weight of that megalithic stone is to deal with the gravity. He
Mm.
then said they use sound to create anti-gravity fields. That's how the pyramids were built. That's how they dealt with the stone. And we know that. We can see blocks of stone. We have the unfinished obelisk at Aswan that's 110 feet long, estimated to weigh 1,200 tons. One single piece of rose cyanide granite. They had every intention of lifting this obelisk and putting it into position, but when they were undercutting it, they found a natural crack in
Mm.
the crystal, in the stone at the bottom. They just abandoned it. They left it because they knew with the crack in the crystal, it would not go to resonance.
Correct.
They
Right.
could not. And for our blessing, they left it for us to find. And we can see the technology there. You see granite scooped out like it's clay,
Right.
like it was like it was dirt. They had these tremendous machines working on ultrasonic vibrations.
So you think what they did using sound is they melted the molecular compounds of the granite so soft
Very
that they can
good.
actually just manipulate the atoms of the granite. Is that what you're
You're
suggesting?
making a very good point. It is a very high point of controversy right now. I actually had a major discussion about this last night. I lead a chematology study group in my area. We were discussing this last night because we were discussing the Great Pyramid in detail and all the theories about it. One of the major theories that is proposed is that they made concrete. They softened the stone, they used molds, and they cast the stones. This theory is very popular by by a French chemist named Joseph Davidovich, Dr. Joseph Davidovich, who wrote a book in 1996 called The Pyramids and Enigma Solved, where he claimed, based on a few samples he was given by someone, and I can talk in detail about that, we really criticize his methodology, that he found that the stones were synthetic limestone. He believes they took slurries of limestone, they made stones, and that's how they built the pyramids. Well, we refute this. We've tested the stone. We've been testing the stone for 10 years. I've tested stone inside the pyramid and the casing stones, which were different. They're both limestone, but a different quality of limestone. And I'm working with a great laboratory in the U.S., one of the greatest materials testing laboratories in the world. Upshot is natural stone. No synthetic, no. So what you said then, someone proposed last night, we have a theory that works. This is just a working theory, but we call it ultrasonic impact machining. They had a tool that was spinning at thousands of RPMs per second. That tool created a sonic wave. That sonic wave went in front of this tool, went into the granite, and momentarily, as you said, we'll put it this way, altered the physics of the stone. Changed it, softened it, actually, as someone proposed last night, moved it out of third dimension. And this is something we can get in deeper, because we're talking about people who built the pyramids, us, our ancestors, who were using 360 senses while we only use 5.
Right.
So they could think in solid geometry. Okay? There's no blueprints. There's never going to be any papyruses that say how the Great Pyramid was built. First of all, it was built before writing, so there'll never be any written. But there is, even the oral tradition comes back, said it was all done in the head. They visualized it in the head, blueprints in the head. They saw the machines and the tools they need to make. They saw the stones that they needed, and they went and did it. So the idea here is that the sound actually moved the granite into fourth and fifth dimension. Took it out of third dimensional hardness instantaneously, almost for like a microsecond. It softened the stone. The diamond tool went through it like it was butter. As soon as the cut was made, it went back into third dimension hardness. This is why we cannot find evidence of residue. In other words, if the stone was softened, and if they cut the stone while it was still soft, like you cut clay, you'd have a whole bunch of excess would come out of it.
Right.
All excess as it
be residue, essentially.
You'd have to skim that excess off
to
make the finished stone. No evidence of that whatsoever. No evidence. So this is why we say the stones were not cast. Another criticism is there are no two stones alike in the Great Pyramid or anywhere in Egypt. So they would have had to have thousands of different molds if they were making this like bricks and making the pyramid like as Davidovich has suggested. The only reason he suggested this is, as a chemist, he came up with a theory called geopolymerization for plastics. He's great. He deserves credit for that. Great idea to make cheaper, finer plastics. So he was thinking with a 20th century mindset. What would be the cheaper and easier way to build the Great Pyramid? Well, make bricks, of course. Not cut the stone, make bricks. Only it falls apart. There's no two stones that are alike.
Right.
And they fit together like they're designed to fit together like gloves without mortar to resist earthquakes. So there's no doubt in our mind, again, working with engineers like Chris Dunn, another person you should interview, geologists like Robert Schock, we know the stone is natural stone. We've tested the stone. No casting, no melting of the stone. However, what you said is correct. We believe instantaneously they altered the physics of the stone with sound, made it softer to cut, and then it went right back to being hard again.
Well, that kind of reminds me of something that they talk about even in the Yoga Sutras, and there's a video on YouTube about a yogi psychic. Actually, he's a meditator, and he was from Java, Indonesia, and they actually videotaped him pushing a what is it called? They videotaped him pushing it was a piece of wood, a chopstick, through an actual table. And when he tried to describe how it was, then he basically said he would imbue it with a sense of consciousness, I guess alter the vibration of the chopstick so he can basically move it through what we would consider physical matter, and then it would reconstruct on the other side. So it sounds very similar to these proposed techniques about how they built the pyramids.
Absolutely, and we discuss in our work, of course, the great Nikola Tesla, who virtually invented the 20th century. Right. And Nikola Tesla would say, if you understand frequency and vibration, you understand everything.
Right. Everything is just a matter of frequency, vibration. Absolutely.
And that's the work I did with the Rosicrucians too. They talk about it. In fact, the Rosicrucians have an expression. Instead of talking about God being a consciousness of being, they say all is vibration.
All is vibration, just a matter of vibration.
And so
Absolutely.
now we know through our work that these ancient people knew that even better than we do,
Hmm.
because they were working with more senses. They were in different dimensions all the time, maybe not even as much in the third dimension as we are now.
Correct.
So they
Correct.
could understand cosmic law, and they understood frequency, vibration, and all of that. And that's how they built these things. So, yes, the pyramids were machines. Again, the greatest source on this is our master engineer colleague Christopher Dunn, who was interviewed and was brought to the U.S. He was a journeyman apprentice in Manchester, England at 16, became a master machinist, was recruited by an American aerospace company at 19 years of age, came to the U.S. and has worked in the aerospace industry for many years. High tech engineering, high spec constructural detail work. He went to Egypt in 1985,
Hmm.
went inside the Great Pyramid, and as a lark, being an engineer, he decided to back engineer the Great Pyramid.
Hmm.
And he looked at it and said, this is no tomb. This is built
Yeah.
like a machine. And
No way.
he first wrote an article in Popular Science and then in Atlantis Rising. And he wrote a book, 1998. It is still a classic in the field, The Giza Power Plant, where he
I read that book
basically,
actually.
yeah, now he's come up with a second book, wrote in 2010 called Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. I highly recommend that one too,
I'll
where he
definitely
talks
check that one
about
out.
the engineering and the machining, how they use arc cuts. You look at some of the crowns in rose granite of Ramses II at supposedly the Temple of Luxor, and there's a perfect arc. The crowns are perfect arc cuts. That only can be done by machine. As he talks about, as it's done today, you put a program into a CAD machine. The CAD machine then goes and cuts the granite, perfectly cutting each time the same way it did before. When he looks at these relics, artifacts of ancient Egypt, he sees the same effects. Advanced machining cannot be done with hand tools and, arc cuts, arc radiuses, which are amazing.
One more thing I wanted to backtrack. So, how were the crystals exactly going from the crystal skulls to pyramids? How were crystals as such used in the pyramids? Did they use them as a capstone, or how did they integrate crystals into these ancient pyramids?
Crystal is in the quartz. Okay, crystal is in the igneous rock.
Right.
Igneous rock goes from basalt to diorite, granodiorite to granite. As it cools, more quartz comes in. So the first of a volcanic flow, the first stone that cools is basalt. Basalt has the lowest quartz content, but the highest resistance to water erosion. So that's why you see a lot of sites, specifically things made out of basalt. That's why all our ocean floors are basalt.
Hmm.
They resist more
Right.
erosion. So all our continents are granite because it allows to cool highest quartz. Quartz is what gives the stone its transmission ability. It is the quartz that's able to transmit energy. Knowing that, so that's why the pyramids are built the way they are. They are layered like electrician would say a Faraday cage. You may have quartz, you'd have limestone, quartz, you have another type of limestone. You may have basalt, and all of these stones are interacting with each other to be transmissions of energy, receivers of energy. It is the quartz that does that. It is the quartz in our radios that gives us the ability to transmit and receive. It is the quartz in our computers that gives us the ability to
Right.
transmit and receive. So it is the quartz in the stone and the pyramids, which are be transmitters and receivers of energy. One of the functions, now, when I give a lecture on this, and I give all the facts, how much the Great Pyramid weighs, how many stones there are, it sits on 13 acres, it weighs anywhere between 6 and 7 million tons, etc., etc. And then we talk about the fact that the stone in there is manufactured and put in a way perfectly to be a transmitter and resonant. So we used to talk about it as also being a radio device to transmit energy. Now, some people say, did it connect with three-dimensional extraterrestrials? Yes, possibly. But we say more, it contacted interdimensional consciousness. Now, if you ever heard the work of a man named Drunvalo Melchizedek, a
Yes.
great faith
Yes.
teacher, he talks about the majority of consciousness that exists is non-corporal, non-third dimension.
Right.
And so the majority of consciousness is out there, not in physical body. The pyramids were used to communicate and transmit energies from all dimensions of understanding.
Now, so that's very interesting. But one question I think many people have, especially myself, The capstone on all these pyramids seem to be missing.
Only the Great Pyramid.
Only the Great Pyramid. What do you think was there originally when it was built, and what purpose did it serve?
This is another controversy. Some people think there was a capstone on the Great Pyramid that was removed. I am of the belief it was never capped.
Never capped.
It is never capped. It is different than all of the other pyramids. The other two pyramids on the Giza Plateau, all of the pyramids have a capstone. Okay, I think it's because its specific function of the Great Pyramid as a major transmitter of energy and receiver of energy that it was not capped. But the only way I will be able to definitively prove that is to someday, if possible, if I'm still physically able, to climb up to the top of the pyramid. All the photographs I've seen taken at the top of the pyramid don't take pictures of the floor. We need detailed pictures of that whole space to see if we can see how the erosion is there. If the erosion is very, very ancient, meaning it's not capped, or if the erosion is more modern, meaning it was capped, or if we can see where there were slots, indicate different things, different structures that may have been up there. So that is a controversy.
Still a controversy.
Again, it is only the Great Pyramid that
Right. Now, what about the limestone that they used to seal it that was eventually taken off of the Great Pyramids? What purpose do you think that served?
Okay, again, we studied the stone and we find that the Great Pyramid is made of two different types of limestone. The interior stone is actually quarried from the plateau itself. We've tested it. We know the chemical signature has lots of salt, a lot of halide. They used a different stone for the casing stone, which was pure limestone, pure calcium carbonate with no impurity. They went as far as 8 miles away, what is known as the Mokattam Hills, where the Cairo airport is today, to quarry the stone. We know where the quarry is. It had different properties. Again, each stone, because of its physical qualities, because of its matrix, its chemical composition, had different properties. And they knew that. So they layered the stone. They put the capstone stone, the casing stones of pure limestone for a specific reason of transmission, to be the outer layer. The inner layers of the inner limestone had different transmission qualities. The granite that's in there, different transmission, etc., etc. So they layered the stones because they knew the properties, the geophysical properties of the stone itself, and it was all part of this whole structure to be layered like Faraday cages. And the energy, in other words, we also know the casing stones, the calcium carbonate, on the outside, I don't know if you're aware, but the sides of the Great Pyramid are not flat. They're concave.
Right.
You know that?
So it's actually 8 sides of the pyramid, not 4, as most people think.
Exactly. It is bifurcated. You're absolutely right. So it is actually a 4-sided or 8-sided microwave dish antenna. We also believe the Great Pyramid accumulated microwaves.
Okay.
And that the limestone was for that reason. The pure calcium carbonate was the best source to accumulate microwaves. So again, I could sit here and talk with you. The things we've talked about, electricity, of course, electromagnetism, of course. We also produce, again, this is Chris Dunn's theory in the Giza power plant, that the Great Pyramid actually produced hydrogen gas. We now believe that water was the source of that it produced hydrogen gas. They used the hydrogen gas for energy. Everything tuned to the Great Pyramid. The King's Chamber is tuned to the frequency of 438 to 440 hertz, which is A. The stone box, we don't call it a sarcophagus. It's a resonant box. The resonant box of cyanite rose granite in the King's Chamber is tuned to F sharp, which is the frequency of hydrogen. Everything about the pyramid amplifies the gas of hydrogen. But we could sit here. We have a theoretical physicist in Ukraine. His name is Dr. Vladimir Krasnelahov. We call him Dr. K. You can see why. He's been working with us for years, since Chris Dunn came out with his book. He believes the Great Pyramid also pulses quantum waves. So that the people who built the Great Pyramid had a knowledge of physics we're just approaching today. He can prove it. He can not prove it. He can test this. There is a portable device that's created by a Russian scientist, a friend of his, called TESSI device. It's battery operated. We could take it in the Great Pyramid. They would first form a baseline. Of course, natural cosmic waves, natural quantum waves are hitting the Earth all the time. So you'll find a baseline. That's the natural form. Then, if you can show that the Great Pyramid is pulsing quantum waves, this is not natural. This was incorporated into the structure. Therefore, he believes the quantum waves produced by the Great Pyramid enables people to exist at the highest optimum state. In other words, it increased immune systems, increased abilities to live, gave more life and longevity and health. And we
Give,
also believe the ancient people lived long times.
give me a little bit of a description of what quantum waves are exactly.
Well, what he's talking about is what we talk about. We know that we have material part. We talk about the atom, and then we now that in quantum mechanics they break the atom down into subatomic particles,
Right.
quarks, mesons, gluons. It goes on and on. So he believes he's bringing back an old theory, which was the theory of physics before the 20th century, before Einstein.
Hmm.
Einstein came along and said that there's only dead space. There's
Right.
only the occupants of stars. Space is dead. There's no energy there. And all the ancient theories have talked about ether, talked about that there is energy. Now, in quantum physics, they are rejecting Einstein. And they're saying, yes, there is energy. They're calling it dark matter and dark
Right.
energy. It cannot be observed. It cannot be measured. But the reason why they're saying this is because of Einstein's theories of Big Bang and the explosion going out, the universe should be slowing down. According to his predictive ability, it came from this one explosion, moving out, slow until it's finally going to slow down and then come back together. But all the latest tests from our physicists are showing the universe is speeding up,
Right.
not slowing down. So therefore, there is an energy working on it, and they've proposed dark energy. Well, Vladimir Klausowitz says quantum particles are always colliding. Always, they're invisible, but they're always colliding, and they create energy waves. He calls these waves interton waves. He says that is the energy that's there, and that's the energy that's in the universe that we're connecting to with all of these things.
So
So
the
that there
dark,
is. So that there is.
the
In
dark.
other words, the Rosicrucians would have called it consciousness. It's
Right.
what the energy, the mystery schools talk about. That there's no dead space, there's no
Right.
vacuum space. It's a nonsensical idea. There's consciousness, there's energy in everything.
Everywhere. So the dark matter is basically what they used to call the ethers, what they're calling dark matter today. That's
Exactly,
right.
exactly.
Right.
And this man, this great theoretical scientist, is bringing back the metaphysics because he's a yoga. He's also a metaphysician, practices yoga. He's bringing back the old metaphysical theories and giving it a now new physical theory. He's calling it interton waves. Subatomic particles constantly colliding, create these waves. These waves can be measured,
Hmm.
and that's what he's saying. And so he's saying if the Great Pyramid is pulsing these waves, it was incorporated purposely into the structure by those who knew quantum physics.
And what was this doctor's name again in the Ukraine?
Vladimir Krasnodar. I can actually, we'll have to spell it and mail you the link. He has a
Okay.
website.
Cool.
And
Okay.
he has a website in English where he talks about
Good.
interton. The unfortunate thing, this man is one of the world-class scientists. He was recruited by the Soviet Union when he was 17, 18, got his doctorate in physics when he was very young. He actually worked on designing the Mir space station when he was a mere youth in his 20s.
Impressive.
The Soviet Union collapsed, right? If you know where Ukraine is today, Ukraine is
Right.
in utter poverty. This is a man, world-class physicist, who's working for perhaps $70 a month. That's all he can afford to be paid at the physics institutes in Ukraine.
Hmm.
So, the question is, why hasn't he come to Egypt and tested this? He can't even afford to come
Really?
from Ukraine to Egypt. So we'd have to get funded to do this,
Right.
to bring it and the device, and we could do it.
Right. Maybe that's what I was saying. Maybe in the future we could all work something out together and all meet in Egypt and test some of these theories.
Why not? We have
Yeah.
many. I could give you whole bookloads of lists of experiments we want to conduct. I mean, many more sound experiments. Sound experiments have been conducted. We know the frequency in the Great Pyramid. Again, we say to you, as we're taught by our teacher, Hakeem, every pyramid, every temple was tuned to a different frequency of sound.
Hmm.
So none of these structures existed in vacuums. In other words, we can talk about the Great Pyramid. We can isolate it. Now you say, the three pyramids at Giza Plateau. Well, we're taught there originally were 9 large pyramids on the Giza Plateau.
Mm-hmm.
We have found, and I can take you, if you come to Egypt with me, we found possibly where Hakeem said it would be, quarried 4th pyramid. So that defeats the idea of the Belt of Orion, that the 3 pyramids are just tuned to the Belt of Orion. No,
Right.
there were 9 large pyramids. They're all buried still under the sand. But this was a grid line. Now, this is what we understand. When I talked about the land of Osiris, from Dashur to Abu Sir, all lined up with stone masonry pyramids in a Fibonacci spiral. That's why in a curved line. And they all work together. But we all believe that pyramids were connected all around the world. We're talking about a global maritime culture. We don't call it Atlantis. I actually have a chapter in my first book where I discuss the myth of Atlantis. When I first discussed Atlantis with Hakeem, he wouldn't hear of it. He said it was a racist theory. I said, what do you mean? He's saying, it's saying that people from Atlantis, a dying continent of white people, came to Africa and taught ignorant people of color how to have civilization and build pyramids. He rejected that outlook.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, okay, maybe we'll repropose it. maybe there was a global culture. Atlantis, the continent that was there off the coast of Gibraltar, was there. It collapsed. They went to Africa, who they had already connected with their cousins, and they merged with the civilization. He was okay with that, as long as in other words, he would not conceive us talking about Atlantis, Lemuria, any previously highly advanced civilization besides Kemet. In other words, we're talking about Kemet 65,000 years ago. That goes back to the time of Lemuria and Atlantis. We're talking about a cataclysm occurring 12,000 years ago, which stopped the Great Pyramids as being a machine. So that's supposedly the end of Atlantis. Well, Kemet was already high civilization then. So the idea is prefer to call it global maritime culture. We find megalithic structures all around the world. We're finding pyramids all around the world. They were all connected in a worldwide grid. People's consciousness were all together at that time. There were no borders, there were no kings, there were no gods, there were no religions, there were no wars. This is the golden age, which is spoken of in literature. It actually was a time. We can see evidence in the archaeological record of thousands of years of civilization where there were no wars before a certain time period. Then this last 5,000 years were characterized by this kind of warfare and desperation and these different civilizations. But before that, people had a global consciousness. People didn't say, I'm an American, you're a Brit. They were global, and the pyramids around the world were connected. Hakeem talks about that people could go into the temples of Egypt and psychically go anywhere in the world. And the Rosicrucians actually teach this principle. It's called projection, project the consciousness to somewhere else in the world, being able to see things there, record it, and come back.
So they use the pyramids basically as an instrument for astral projection, or what we would call astral projection today. Is that it?
No. I would say the pyramids were machines.
Okay.
Basic function of the pyramids was to produce, transmit, to create, produce, transmit, and collect energy. That's why we use the term. Pyramid is a Greek word. Comes from the term pyramidos. Even in the Greek, it means fire in the center. Has nothing to do with the tomb. But the ancient term was per netter. Per meant house in the ancient language.
Okay.
Nectar is the word that has been terribly mistranslated. Again, written NTR. We put the E's in there. Nectar was translated by Champollion from the Rosetta Stone to mean deity, god, or goddess. So here comes the idea that the ancient Egyptians were polytheistic, worshipped hundreds of gods and goddesses. But along came a researcher in the 20th century, an Alsatian Frenchman named R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch. If you ever get the opportunity to interview John Anthony West, who is the Dean of Alternative Egyptologists, he is the champion of Schwaller's teachings. Schwaller was the first one to challenge this translation of nectar being deity. He said, no, it's an aspect of the whole, a principle of divineness, but not the whole itself. And Hakeem took it even further, said it was a sense that's within us. So in other words, we're saying that he teaches that we're innately born with 360 senses. 180 we label feminine, 180 we label masculine. We make the label. So he says, if we're only thinking we're using 5, what does that mean? He would say, he doesn't mean to insult anybody, but we're crippled today.
Correct. Comparatively.
We think we only have 5 senses. But look how we use these words. We don't have the language. We say to someone will say, I saw a dream last night. No, you didn't. You were sleeping. Your eyes were closed.
Right.
There's the expression, I hear what you're saying, but it's not using your ears. I understand what you're saying. We only have the language of the 5 senses.
Correct.
But 360 will label themselves. We say sometimes, oh, you're using your 6th sense. Right? Or you're using your PSI or your extrasensory perception. These are the senses we have. So we're talking about people operating with 360 senses. They could think in 4 dimensions, 5 dimensions, 6 dimensions, not just limited to 3rd dimension. They did not only not have a written language before there was writing, they did not have a spoken language. Sound was sacred. Sound was only to be used in healing, in cutting, shaping, lifting stone, creating anti-gravity fields, etc., or for chanting, for making sound or music, for making sound to uplift consciousness, to raise our level, to stay in that highest state of consciousness. We developed a spoken language when we started to lose the senses. And this happens first around 12,000 years ago, when there's a worldwide cataclysm which occurs, which ends the pyramids as machines. They then become temples of initiation, which is what the Rosicrucians, Masons, and all mystery schools picked up. I first deviated from Egyptology in the 70s when I got involved with the Rosicrucian order, because they were teaching, no, the Great Pyramid was a temple of initiation. All the great masters were initiated in it. Oh, okay, so it wasn't a tomb. But then I meet Hakeem. Oh, no. Then Chris Dunn comes. First, it was a machine. Nobody went inside the Great Pyramid when it was fully functioning. We would have been vaporized. That's the type of energy produced. However, when this worldwide cataclysmic event happened, and we trace it, many people have different ideas what was the cause. Dr. Robert Schoch thinks it was severe solar activity, solar flares, which caused earthquake tsunamis. We believe it's what's called the Vela supernova, and it can be Googled, VELA. Occurred between 14,000 and 11,000 years ago, and we believe impacted our entire solar system. Going from the outwards in, Pluto is not a planet. Pluto has, if you know its orbit, has a very weird elliptical orbit. It actually comes in closer to Uranus to us, and it is not the furthest planet. Then it goes out. It has a very...
So we have 9 planets then, essentially, or how many do we have in our solar system?
It might have been 10 originally. One was destroyed.
Okay.
But Pluto was probably a moon of Uranus. That this event caused it to knock it out and cause it to be as it is. Because its moons, Charon, are almost as big as Pluto itself. So they're not actual really moons of Pluto. So then you go to Uranus. Uranus is 180 degrees on its side. Tilted, totally on its side. What could have caused it? And then you come in between Mars and Jupiter. Is the asteroid belt. There is a theory there was a planet there. It's called the exploding planet theory. A great astroscience physicist, that is Tom Van Flandern. He supports the idea that there was a planet between Mars and Jupiter. It exploded. Our Earth itself is on a 23.5 degree tilt.
Correct.
It's what gives us our precession of the equinoxes, gives us our zodiac. It is argued, and the great book on this is a book came out by 2 British scientists, Allen and Dallaire. It's called Cataclysm 9500 BC, still available on Intertraditions. Barbara Hadclough published it, and then she wrote her own book about it called Catastrophobia, which the idea is this cataclysm caused the Earth to shift, changed the seasons, changed the climate on the Earth, destroyed the grid line of the Great Pyramid, shook violently. We have evidence that there's damage inside the Great Pyramid. The Egyptologists say it's an earthquake. We can prove it's not an earthquake, but that there was a fire and explosion inside the Great Pyramid. I can show you all this evidence. I can send you pictures of that. The rose granite, which is usually a pinkish color, cyanide granite, is black inside the King's Chamber.
Right.
The stone box is black. The upper wall of the King's Chamber, which Chris Dunn discovered is made of granite, not limestone, is black.
Yeah.
We need to get a sample of that. We could test it. We could then let the physicists tell us what kind of heat could turn rose granite black. Tremendous heat.
Let me ask you.
So that the upshot is, the cataclysm occurred. We think it's developed supernova, changed the climate, also began the waning of senses, where people began to lose the ability. It then led to the idea, the creation of religion, the creation of the stories to tell what happened. And then the Great Pyramid became a temple of initiation, all throughout dynastic times, to what we use it for today. I mean, we do that with our groups today. We do toning, we do sounding. Everybody has an experience. We do an initiation in the Great Pyramid today. But the original intent was a machine. Nobody went inside.
Nobody. Let me ask you really quick, on the subject of planets you were just talking about, it's been kind of known but not really publicized that every planet has a specific sound or frequency that it emanates.
Right.
What relation, if any, did you guys ever discover, does anybody ever talk about with the planets and their frequency and their resonated sound with the pyramids itself? Is there any correlation there between the planets and the pyramids?
You just proposed another experiment. I mean, that needs to be studied. I mean, it's just now that NASA is releasing the sound recordings as they go past Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And we know Saturn, the music from Saturn was unbelievable.
Right.
The frequency of Saturn is amazing. No, that's a great experiment. But I can tell you what we know. Again, Chris Dunn said that the Great Pyramid is a coupled oscillator, which means a coupled oscillator is a device that is vibrating in harmonic resonance with an already vibrating source. What is the already vibrating source for the GP? The Earth herself, the Schumann resonance. The Schumann resonance is between 2 and 10 hertz. the Great Pyramid has been vibrating between 2 and 8 millihertz. It is a harmonic of the Earth itself. And there is a pulse. People can hear a pulse when you're in the King's Chamber. We turn out the lights, we turn out all sound, and you can hear it. That pulse, my friend, is 72 beats per minute. What else is that? Does that bring into your mind? What else beats?
Well, the pyramids, the number of the pyramids,
No, no, no,
among
no.
other
That's
things.
your heart, my friend.
Right.
That is your heartbeat.
Right.
That is why the Great Pyramid resonates with everybody. I can tell you so many stories. I mean, I've brought people. You know, I've done. My next trip will be my 20th trip to Egypt in the last 23 years.
Hmm.
Most of those were tours, like 17 to 18 different tours. I've had people come, always into it, men who wanted to do the science, when he wanted to do the spirituality. I've had men who were dragged to Egypt by their wives, who were not into anything, not into spirituality, metaphysics, pyramid power. It could be nothing. It was just a pile of rocks. So we say to them, just be open-minded. Just come in and join with us. Do what we do. See what happens. Every single person I have ever brought to Egypt has an experience in the Great Pyramid.
Nice. What
Well,
are some of the more profound experiences in terms of transformations?
But I can tell you. Again, Yusuf Awayan, who was also a musician and stone carver,
uh-huh.
second youngest son of my teacher, has been listening to this all his life and knows sound in that. We know, again, as I said, every different structure, pyramid, temple, was tuned to a different frequency of sound. We know the frequency the Great Pyramid is tuned to, at least for men. It's a low tone, it's like that. Yusuf has perfect pitch. I don't. He can hit it. In the King's Chamber, of course, is the greatest, because it's all granite and it's all resonant. It's been declared by musicians as the greatest recording room in the world to make harmonics and resonance. But there is, as you go in, you've never been to Egypt, have you?
I've been actually twice,
Okay.
and I've been inside the Great Pyramid.
Okay, so you know, as you go in the King's Chamber, you have to duck down,
Mm-hmm.
then you stand up. There's what's called an antechamber, and then you
Right.
duck down again, and you go in the King's Chamber. Well, the key is the antechamber. In the antechamber, only two people could stand, and Yusuf took me in there, and he said, turn around and face me. We faced each other. He said, hit the tone I hit. I hit that tone. I saw the sound come together, go up into the pyramid. The whole pyramid turned alive, resonating. And then, my friend, alive, resonating. And then, my friend, I say to people, as I said to the group last night, there was no longer any Yusuf. There no longer was any Stephen. There was only the sound.
Wow.
You
So you
me
went into a trance, is what you're saying, or?
the greatest out-of-body experiences I've ever had in my life were laying in the stone box in the Great Pyramid.
Wow. Just by
So
harmonizing with
totally,
him.
totally disappeared. There
Wow.
only is the sound.
Wow.
Nothing.
Just by sound vibration. And what
So,
tone did he hit?
it's a low basso tone.
So maybe it's like the ohm that the yogis talk about, like that?
Close. It's close. It's close.
Hmm.
Women hit a higher tone. It's interesting. Women. Everybody finds it. We tell people. We don't tell people what to say, what to do, not to follow us. Find your own voice in the Great Pyramid. That's what we tell them. But everybody, after a while, some people go off on high operatic singing, and they go off the extreme. But after a while, it's amazing. Everybody seems to come down to each other, and everybody hits that. And when you hit that group tone, you disappear.
Wow.
You are no longer there. So you could interview all the people I brought. They would all say they've had different kind of experiences.
Sure.
Some saw past lives. Some people saw this, saw that. Saw scenes. But everybody has some type of experience. As you know, I'm sure you did. I mean, that's why you went and built this center, because of your
Absolutely.
experience. Great Pyramid.
Absolutely. I mean, I was inspired before I ever went to the pyramids, but when I went to the pyramids, I had a lot of experiences. Just one of the first impressions I had when I first saw the pyramids, and it's not the first time it came to me, but I was absolutely confident that it was not built within the last 3, 4, or 5,000 years. Just by looking at it intuitively, the vibration, I said, there's no way that modern man's thinking and mentality built this. Not a possibility. That's really the first impression I got when I went there, and then a lot of experiences as I was going up the King's Chamber. I spent some time alone in the King's Chamber in the sarcophagus, just touching the stones, connecting with the stones. I've had just a lot of different feelings, vibrations, thoughts, and one thing I can conclusively say is it's not from this time period. Definitely not.
I had a physicist with me in 2009. And he kept saying he really wanted to have a spiritual experience. I mean, he's been in physics all his life, the hard science. He wanted to have a spiritual experience. He was Asian. So we went into the Red Pyramid at Dashur. So I said, I'll tell you what, we're going to tone, we're going to create the energy in here. Just lean up against the wall and put your hands on the wall. And we did it, and he went nuts. He said, I feel it. I just had this incredible experience. The energy just went through my whole body.
Right.
Felt this incredible vibration. So then I said to him, do you think, as a physicist, that sound could be used to create an anti-gravity field? He said, absolutely. Makes perfect sense.
It's already done, right?
Well, it's been demonstrated by acoustic engineer Tom Danley. We have two people, two doctoral students at the University of Bristol in the UK. One is a engineer, one is a physicist. Great combination. Their doctoral thesis, and can't release their names until they publish their work, until they get their doctorate. But their doctoral thesis is using sound to show can lift huge stones as an anti-gravity field. And that's what's going to be their doctoral work. And yes, it has been demonstrated, but it's not accepted. It's not accepted fully by science yet. It's not fully accepted,
Progressive ideas take longer, right?
Of course.
Right.
But so that is the idea. I mean, sound. Hakeem was so brilliant is that he could look through a person. When he met somebody, he knew exactly where they were at. When somebody would ask a question to him, he would answer the question only to the level of the questioner. So when he met me, I was the son that he had always wanted. None of his sons went to college. None of his sons got degrees like he did. I already was degreed scientist, already a credentialed archaeologist, and a Rosicrucian, the spiritual side. So he said to me, for my work with him, was to concentrate on sound and water. The knowledge the ancients had of both and the interplay of both. So the key is, under all these sites, every site in the world, what you call a megalithic site, where there is a pyramid or temple, ancient culture, there is underground running water. The crystal and the water is what creates the energy. In other words, everybody goes to what's called a sacred site, a power place, and they meditate there and they feel energy. What is the energy there? Well, I say, and I've defined it, at every power place, sacred site, there are three things present. An underground running water, a natural source of crystal, and igneous rock, volcanic stone, which is crystal.
Right.
So it is the crystal and the water that creates the electromagnetic field, the energy that we feel at these sites. Ancient people knew this, senses being open, naturally gravitated to these power places. This is where they put the temples, this is where they put the Sphinx, this is where they put the pyramids, on the energy spots of it. If you look at the Earth, as Plato finally described it, as an isododecahedron, you can see the grid lines on the Earth. We know the Earth is a living organism, has acupuncture points. Again, this is what obelisks specifically. Obelisks had a specific function apart from pyramids. They were acupuncture needles for the Earth. Obelisks would dissipate seismic energy, telluric energy, and reduce the stress of earthquakes. One of the things Chris Dunn points out in the Giza Power Plant, written in 1998, that no doubt the Great Pyramid will serve to alleviate seismic stress and prevent it. The greatest fault line on our planet is not the San Andreas Fault in California. It is the fault line that goes through Eastern Africa. That's why the great archaeology is there, because this fault line has ripped open the Earth and we can find fossils that go back millions of years. The Great Pyramid was on this fault line, and we believe for the length of the Cometian civilization, it prevented any major earthquakes. And indeed, we know the Great Pyramid has been hit by earthquakes. Egypt has in modern times, but there's no evidence of any ancient one.
Let me ask you another question. Going back, you mentioned Plato, and he had basically the 5 Platonic solids. How do those figure into the pyramids if they do at all? Did you guys ever look into that research?
Well, again, if you come from jungle research, it starts from the seed of life to the flower of life. That goes to every possible geometric form. So there's no doubt, because the flower of life is found in dynastic Egypt, that this type of teaching came from Egypt to the Greeks. We know that the flower of life is found on the walls of the Syrian temple in Abydos.
Correct.
It is modern. It was put on by red, black, ochre paint by followers of Pythagoras. But we know Pythagoras was initiated in Egypt. He learned all sacred geometry in Egypt. Plato was initiated in Egypt. Socrates was initiated in Egypt. The reason why we devote most of our modern science to the teachings of Aristotle did not accompany his student Alexander the Great to Egypt. Alexander was never initiated in Egypt. Therefore, his understanding of physics and metaphysics became the basis of modern science, which is not what Plato and Socrates We're teaching ether and all
Right.
this stuff. So it all comes from Egypt. We know that all of these symbols in sacred geometry came out of all the forms, if you take it in plane geometry, the Great Pyramid is the triangle imposed upon a square. But it's actually solid geometry. It is the cone imposed upon the cube. The Great Pyramid is a star tetrahedron.
Amazing. And that's all pyramids or just the Cheops pyramids?
No, all pyramids, really.
All
But the Great
pyramids are like
Pyramid
that.
The Great Pyramid was special. We find similarities in all pyramids, but there was a specialness to the Great Pyramid. The design of the internal structure, the materials used, its height being the tallest of them. So the Great Pyramid was, and interestingly enough, we teach opposite from what Egyptology teaches. We teach the Middle Pyramid, supposedly the Khafre Pyramid. We don't use that name. The Middle Pyramid was the first pyramid built
Mm-hmm.
on the keys before the Great Pyramid because it's built on the highest point of the plateau.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at them together, they look they're the same size. But the Great Pyramid built on a lower level is 20 feet higher, so that it could feel like it's the same size. The Middle Pyramid was a seismic tap. It was first to draw telluric earth energies up, get it ready to be used for usable energy. The second pyramid, the first Great Pyramid was then built. The Middle Pyramid sends the energy to the Great Pyramid, which transfers it and transmits it. So the Great Pyramid had a special function to be that great transmitter. So it is unique, but yet all pyramids are more alike than they are different. The ancient ones, the megalithic pyramids. Now we see some pyramids being claimed around the world which we dispute, which we say are not ancient. People are talking about pyramids in Antarctica, the Bosnia pyramids,
Right.
etc., etc. We don't agree that these are.
What do you think the pyramid in Bosnia was? Do you think that's just an anomaly or a man-made object, or what do you? How do you feel that figures into all
Get
this?
into a lot of controversy with this. I think it's a natural formation.
Okay.
There's definitely energy coming out. They're recording energy. Energy's there. There's nothing in Bosnia that cannot be explained with a natural geological explanation.
Okay.
There's no hewn stone, no megalithic stone, no granite. There's no hewn blocks. Nothing that appears like other pyramids. And as I say to people, there's no cultural context. Who built it? We have evidence, at least in Egypt, of the civilizations, in Peru, Bolivia, there's evidence of ancient civilization. Where's a burial? Where's a pottery? Where's anything that shows that there was an ancient civilization in Bosnia to build it? There isn't.
Right.
So we think it was a publicity.
Interesting.
Same in other places too. There are people now claiming in the Urals in Russia. There's a lot of stuff coming out of Russia. Some is good, some is very
In China, yeah, in China too, they're doing the same thing, right?
Well, they're showing blocks of stone in Russia that they say that weighs 10,000 tons, that's 4 million years old, blah, blah, blah. And it's all natural formation.
Right.
Oh.
Okay,
So
well,
we have to be cautious with this stuff. But
Right.
we do agree. The pyramids in China are man-made. There were pyramids all around the world. There's no definite. There were pyramids in the U.S. They are, again, they don't want it. So the anthropologists call it the mounds people. If you've ever been to Cahokia, south of St. Louis, in the U.S., that was a pyramid. Cahokia is laid out exactly like the Mayan city of Monte Alban. We believe the Mayans and even Aztecs came in and united with the Athabascan Indians, natives who were here, and so that there were pyramids in the U.S. There was a stone megalithic culture. David Hatcher Childress has written about it, that there are areas in New Mexico, and it's particularly in Arizona, where you can see megalithic ruins, stone monuments, and this is not the modern Indians, not the Athabascan Indians.
Which part of Arizona?
South of, north of Phoenix, near between. He's written about it.
Okay.
So he's a good person for you to interview, David.
We'll do an interview with him.
He attributes everything to aliens, of course, because he's the main person on ancient aliens. But he's an amazing adventurer. He's seen things all around the world. And we know there were megalithic sites all around the world that were connected. No doubt about it.
Back to your the daykeeper in Egypt, your friend that you mentioned several times, basically your teacher there. He's classified as a daykeeper. What exactly?
An indigenous wisdom keeper.
An indigenous wisdom keeper. So basically, that means he knows the entire history of that area, or what does that exaccly constitute?
His tribe was called the Ai tribe, the Awyani tribe. They were responsible for knowing the history of other. But he talks about the difference between what's the indigenous tradition and what we understand.
Okay.
We think that the indigenous tradition was children sitting around the campfire or in the lodge, and the elders telling them the creation mythology, the creation stories, how it came to be. He said no. He said the indigenous is because we talk about Egypt, ancient Kemet, being a matriarchy. not patriarchy. That's why we say there are no male pharaohs. The word per-ah, which the Greeks, they attributed to the male-headed household, it meant the woman's house, so it was a matriarchy. Descent went from mother to daughter, so there were no male pharaohs. That's one of the fallacies right away. So we talks about, no, sitting around listening to elders tell you is patriarchy. That's
Right.
elders telling the children. In ancient Kemet, there was no differentiation between children and adults. The term was sesh. Sesh meant the people, all the people. Children were just considered little sesh, just little adults. So he tells, for this first 7 years of our life in a matriarchal society, we're subject to mama's laws, the laws of mother. She tells us how to act, how to eat, how to shit, how to sleep, what to do, how to be a person, how to be human. But he said around the age of 8, and this is interesting, corresponds to Rosicrucian teachings, because the Rosicrucian teachings talk about 7 cycles too. They talk about dividing the year into 7 cycles of 52 days. They divide our life into 7-year cycles, 7, 14, 21, etc. And so did the ancient Cometians. It shows where the Rosicrucians say they got their teachings from ancient Egypt. So he said the first 7 years of life was subject to mama's law. At the age of 8, the child turns his back on mama and says, I'm not going to follow your rules anymore. I'm not going to follow your judgment. Mama then goes like this: I've done my job. Go out into the world and learn. So the idea that Hakeem tells us, the indigenous tradition was to know that we have these senses. We have these abilities. Not to listen to what anyone else says, not to listen to what's
Be
written in
your
the book.
own. Be your own, basically.
Even the sacred books, not even to listen to what's in the book. Go out, open your senses, find it for yourself.
And how does one do that exactly, or how did one do that back in those times?
First stage, he tells everyone, ask the questions it was asked in my group last night. If we have these senses, how do we open them?
Right.
The first is to know that you have them. Like we
Okay.
said, instead of saying sixth sense, then say ESP, PSI, we're going to label themselves. He said the saints will label themselves. We don't have the languages for them, but we will. He said this is what the time is now. We're going through cycles. Everything in these chematology teaches there is no beginning. He doesn't. We never believe in Big Bang. It's much more like Buddhism. There is no beginning. There is no end. Just interminable cycles. And so we're going through the low end of the cycle now, called the cycle of Amen, which everything is darkness, hidden, separation.
How
Is
long is
really
that cycle?
5,000 plus years. It begins with the beginning of patriarchy. At the
And are we
beginning,
near the end?
yes, we're in the end. We're in the cusp. We're in now going to the new age of Kheper, the dawn, a new dawn. He called it the awakening. So our senses are going to be open just without doing anything. But if we wish to do that, by meditating, the key thing with Hakeem's life was he was born into this family that had this great tradition. They were licensed antiquities merchants, his uncle and his
Okay.
grandfather. So they had access to tombs, they had access to all the material, they could sell antiquities. He, at a young age, was encouraged from his uncle, at the age of 6, to work for American Egyptologist George Reisner, who did a lot of work around the Sphinx. The Boston Museum of Fine Arts has the greatest collection of old kingdom stuff outside of Egypt, outside Cairo Museum in Boston. I recommend if you're ever there, go see it. George Reisner was digging for Harvard. He got the permission to dig in Egypt, so he brought all that stuff back. So Hakeem, as a small boy, 6 years old, worked for George Reisner, clearing the rubble away around the Giza Plateau. One day he stumbled into a tomb, 6 years old. He looked up at the wall and he said, I have to know what's written on the wall. I have to know what that says. And so there he became his career of being interested in archaeology. So his uncle encouraged him, but his uncle also did, which was common practice in those days, in the village he grew up. He was born in 1926, so we're talking about the 30s. Sent him to a Sufi master to memorize Quran and to learn Sufi tradition. Now, it was common practice in those days for boys to be sent to memorize Quran, not just to learn it, but very few really did. I mean, you're talking about memorizing the whole text.
Right.
He did. He did. All through, even though he was not a practicing Muslim, all through the time I knew him, the last 16 years of his life that I knew him, I would see arguments in the house between he and some of his friends about a phrase in Quran. They would say it was this, he would say it was that. He'd call his daughter, Mariam, come bring the Quran. She'd bring in the Quran every single time. He was right, punctuation, letter perfect. He memorized the Quran. But that was not the greatest gift his teacher gave him. His Sufi master, his name was Ismail, had the title in Arabic, Zennar, the fire of meditation, the fire of consciousness. The Zen is actually a Sanskrit word, and there it is in Arabic. See, they interspose each other. I could We could spend another couple hours talking about the origin of languages, because Hakeem was the greatest philologist, linguist that ever existed. He knew the origin of all languages. So he would say that the greatest gift was his teacher taught him to meditate. To meditate.
What type of meditation did he ever say?
It was a Sufi meditation. He never explained it to me.
Never
But
said.
it doesn't make a difference. All meditation comes to the same point. It doesn't make a difference what system you use if you learn to meditate, because that's what he then did. He went on, encouraged by his uncles to have an academic career. He went to what was then called Fuad University. It is today Cairo University. He graduated in 1952 with dual degrees in Egyptology and archaeology. So he was academically trained. He knew all of Egyptology, but he had spent all of his 20s going around to every site in Egypt. You saw them. Every site you went, you saw old men in galabeas wearing traditional dress, and they were the guides at the sites. They would lead you around. He called them the keepers.
Right.
They knew the wisdom. So they would show him all the secret area stuff at every site that Egyptologists and people didn't see. And then he would meditate. They taught him where what we call the Holy of Holies are. That's where the energy of each site is centered. That's where you'd have the Holy of Holies, where the statue of the god would be, blah, blah, blah. That's where he would meditate. So he saw it. Not only did he have the academic training, but then he went into meditation and he saw it as it was. That's why what he would teach, he would say, what I teach, what we teach is not theory. People want to debate with us all the time. We don't debate it.
Right.
You accept it or you don't. He said he doesn't want people to think or to believe, but to know. And in knowing, it comes direct knowledge.
Maybe that's
so
what next time we'll go into these subjects. What do you think?
Absolutely.
Okay,
but
good.
so this is how he put it all together. So I saw when I sat with him, when I first listened to him, I saw there was a system there. He wasn't just an old man babbling stories that he'd heard from people. There was a system, a real system. So I put the label on it. I called it chematology. He had the system. And so then we put the book out together, and that's the teaching. But he had the system. He had seen something. People always ask him, why do you disagree with the Greek version? Why did you disagree with the Egyptology version? He said, because the oral tradition tells you go out and find it for yourself. You don't listen to what somebody else, and that's what he does.
Absolutely.
And that's what we do. And this is why we say, when we bring a tour group to Egypt, we teach everybody to be, we're all teachers, we're all students. We've had people in our groups discover things for us every time. See things, and it doesn't make a difference how many times I can go to a particular site, we always find something new.
Amazing.
And this is why we say we go with our antennas open, using all our senses.
Right. That's what you got to do, right?
Right. And so we'll continue talking this way, but we're leading a tour in April. And we call our tours techno-spiritual tours, because we work with both sides of the brain. We give you the science, we give you the technology, and we give you the spiritual.
Do you have a link for that tour in April?
It's on the chematology website, www.chematology.com.
Okay.
You go to tours, and it's with Brian Forster, who's, again, a person I highly recommend, and I will connect you to interview. Nobody knows more about the ancient megalithic culture before the Inca in Peru and Bolivia that he does. Right. And we compare the two cultures when we are on site.
So I'll do an interview with him shortly, and then send me those links. I'll put them in the description box, so anybody who's interested in that tour, they can link to you guys directly.
We'll do that.
Okay, Stephen, sounds good. So we'll try to do another interview.
I see this being the first of many.
I think so too. I think so. I mean, there's so many more questions that I wanted to ask you.
And you're a person I love talking to, because you have the background, and you've put yourself out on the line with your center. You've committed to something which is beautiful. Someday I'm going to get to Southern California and definitely be there for you.
Very
and
nice.
maybe give a lecture in your pyramid hall.
Not maybe, definitely. Definitely.
Okay,
definitely.
That's the plan. Well, we can, if you've got the funding, if you could do this, we could set up a conference for you. Bring the people from Egypt. Bring Brian from Peru. And have a dynamic conference.
Okay.
We could invite Robert Schock.
Okay.
And
let's talk about that. Let's talk about that more. Maybe
that could be future plans.
A program for everybody.
Absolutely, future plans.
Okay, sounds good. So we'll wrap this one up, and then we'll do another one pretty soon. And yeah, I guess we'll talk soon, Stephen.
We'll just continue with it, and you get a chance to get a hold of Land of Osiris and read it in between.
I'll find it. Yeah, I think I may actually have that book, because I collected a lot of them, and I didn't read a lot of them yet. But I think there's like the Giza power plant one I read, so I do have that one.
And mine came out in 2001. Chris was 1998. and I followed up in 2001. So I referred to him a lot in all my books and all my work. Chris
Nice.
is a great source. Nobody understands ancient machinery like he
Let's
does.
try to get Chris on. If you can contact with him, see if you
I
can
will.
we can schedule an interview with him.
I could do that too.
Okay, would
Okay,
appreciate that.
Joe.
All right, Steve. Thank you very much, and we will
This
chat
was
soon.
absolutely, it was an absolute pleasure. You take
Okay,
care.
same to here. Same here. Bye
Bye.
now.